Hi, I'm Bryce Ominski. I'm the Chief Technology Officer with iRangers, and I'm here today with Darryl Carr to discuss lessons learned from enterprise architecture, and in particular, what do we need to do going forward to have a successful enterprise architecture practice, and what can the individuals do to make that successful? As we start off, though, I want to, have Darryl introduce himself, but I just want to send an incredible thank you. He's leading our Business Innovation Leadership Technology board, and after 4 years, 12 incredible conferences, over 200 hours of amazing content, he's moving on to greener pastures, and I hope, Darryl, that that's a temporary thing, that you get bored and you come back. So, Darryl, you have over 30 years of architecture experience, and the editor for Enterprise Architecture Professional Journal. You've seen a lot of the good and the bad. Tell us about yourself before we get into this.
Sure. Thanks, Bryce. And thanks for asking me to be part of this series of videos. I really appreciate it. I am based here in Perth in Western Australia. As Bryce mentioned, I've been working in and around the technology space since the end of the 80s. So that explains the white beard. And I've had a number of roles across that time. And sort of slowly progressed through the usual sort of career in IT, if you like, and then sort of slowly but surely kept asking the question, why? Why am I doing this? What does it mean? What is it for? And that's sort of progressed me through into architecture circles, and then into business and technology strategy conversations. So it's been a sort of natural progression, I guess, that I've sort of kept wanting to know why people do things, why companies try to achieve things, what is the purpose of the task that I'm asked to do. Yeah, as I say, it sort of leads you from one conversation to another until you're sitting in a boardroom explaining which direction an organization needs to go. So more of an accidental tourist, if you like, but an interesting process. And along the way, I've had the great opportunity to be involved in many, many community activities as well within the architecture disciplines, including the Built conferences. Thank you for mentioning those. Yeah, 4 years of organising those. That's been a mammoth effort, but they are such unique and much needed events, I think, in the architecture community globally.
And the Built conferences, and not to even mention your involvement with women in architecture, which seems to be a passion. You've done an awesome, a lot of stuff there. I know you've worked very closely with Wendy Keane on that, and just wanted to bring that also. Anything about women in architecture that you just want to mention before we get into it?
Yeah, it's been a long-running conversation for me, probably going back best part of a decade, trying to figure out what we can do about this, what was originally perceived to be a problem, but we have some stats now. We know that in enterprise architecture, it's about 13%. We've seen that through surveys in the US and also here in Australia, and that's not good enough. We're missing perspectives and experiences and approaches to the discipline of architecture that I think would come with having more female participation. So yeah, I've been involved in the movement for a while now, and it's great to see it sort of being formalised through the creation of the global WEA committee and the meetings. In fact, there's a meeting on in about 14 hours from now, as we're recording this, one of the quarterly meetings for WEA, and very happy that to help spread the word around the globe that we've recently launched WEA Australia with some great co-chairs, Heidi Ellison and Dr. Christine Stevenson up in Queensland. So getting a local presence, a local community here in Australia as well, which can only help with the cause.
Awesome. Let's get right into it, Darryl. Enterprise architecture over the last 30 years, I think, has gone through periods where it's been in favor. We've gone through something that you've called, and I love the term, the framework wars. And I certainly remember the TOGAF discussions, the Zachman discussions, and information engineering, the whole rainbow of those things. But ultimately, I think it comes down to three things that we've talked about. Why does enterprise architecture have challenges? And I think those three things are, A, too much technology. The architects are sitting at the wrong table. They're not at the business table, they're at the technology table. Second problem, a lack of grounded KPIs, so that what they're doing isn't really linked to business outcomes for the organization. I think related to that, a lot of times you see the ivory tower phenomena where people are doing all sorts of stuff. And, I've seen organizations get into modeling for modeling's sake, which I don't think actually prove valuable, but we'll get into that. And finally, how do you manage those expectations? So you're in an organization, and at the end of the day, you need to build the right relationships, and you need to say, okay, how do I actually deliver to these people that I'm reporting to if I do get a seat at the business table? So maybe, Darryl, I'll get you to start with getting to how do we get a seat at the table with the business, and how do I ensure that my team gets that seat?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure I'm going to give you the answer you're expecting, Bryce, but
Okay.
I can certainly say that from my point of view, it's not as important where we are in the organization. I know I ran a survey a few years ago, published it on the journal about where people sit, and in excess of 80% of people with an enterprise architecture title were reporting into the technology leadership team. So not only weren't they part of the technology leadership team, they're also obviously in an area of the business that reduced the opportunity to have conversations around business direction. And we know that we have lots of tools in our kit bag to assist with conversations around business strategy formation, around execution, and how to bridge those gaps. And of course, you mentioned Wendy Keane earlier, and her fantastic work in that space to sort of take you from that strategy to execution stage, which is, the differentiator. Everybody has a strategy. It's the execution that's hard, and we need to be able to figure out how to have an impact there. So for me, it doesn't really matter where we sit. It's about the types of conversations that we have. And it's also not about the architecture, and it's not about the architect. It's about having a particular way of looking at problem solving for an organization. It's about how you need to change to be able to realize your strategy. And so that's important. So if we can help people understand how to go through that process in a particular way, it really doesn't matter who comes up with the answer, and it doesn't matter where we sit in the organization, as long as we can have that effect on the discussions, the planning, the execution related to organizational change.
Darryl, are you really saying then that when I look at these three issues, from what I heard you just say, they don't seem to be unrelated? It seems to be a matter of good communication and communicating the right things, and that seems to hit all three: sitting at the right table, getting to the right stakeholders, making sure you're focused on strategy and the expectations. It's almost like, get me in front of the right person. Do I have the skills now to convince them that I'm guiding the organization in the right way?
Or do you have the skills to help them understand how to look at the problem in a particular way so they can come up with the answer? It doesn't have to be the architect that comes up with the answer. In fact, that tends to lead you down a path of feeling like you need to give the answer for everything, and that, one, isn't scalable, and two, you're probably deluding yourself in that you think that you actually have the answer for everything. The reality is that the answers exist out in the organization, and we can act as facilitators so that we can have the conversations we need for people to come to a consensus that is healthy for the organization. So that does, I guess, lead us to a couple of important things that I talk about in a lot of organizations, which is to encourage what I call the twin pillars of critical thinking and open dialogue. So being able to challenge where we are and think differently about how we need to enact change in our organizations, and also creating the space for people to feel safe in having those conversations, which can be challenging. We know what organizations are like. They're still made of people, at least at this point, until the AI takes over. So we need to recognize what it is to be working with groups of people. And so my definition of architecture, as I said before, it's not about the architecture. It's about people, it's about relationships, and it's about communication. These are what architecture is actually about, because we're trying to shape the direction of a thing that happens to be made up of people.
That's really cool. Let's start with dealing with people and having those conversations where we lead them to the well, we bring the right issues out. In one of your discussions, you mentioned how important it is to use like really simple visual metaphors and present that. What are your tips around getting that right conversation going, that right discussion, and if I may say, jumping up to the whiteboard at the right time?
Yes, people who know me and have worked with me understand my relationship with whiteboards. I'm never very far away from one. In fact, there's one about 3 feet to my right as we're talking. And it has been, and I think observed in other disciplines as well, that there's enormous power in the ability to represent something visually and to convey meaning. And numerous times across my career, I've drawn very simple representations of solutions or situations in an organization that is otherwise difficult to sort of keep in your head. So just sort of the textual-based description of the state of an organization in relation to the organization itself and how it's going, or within the context of a particular project. The ability to convey that meaning simply for a group of people around a table to understand and start to think about the problem space differently by simply drawing things on a whiteboard or sketching something out online. Visio used it many, many times for this purpose. It's, I think, just incredibly important and something that we need to appreciate more, the power of simplification of things in terms of being able to visualize them and then get people to see the picture. And I cite an example where I've used it in the past where we were trying to implement a solution, and the owner of that solution was very, very focused on their own part of the business that they were responsible for. And once I drew that solution being implemented within the context of the greater organization and all of the other teams that were impacted by the change that that person was interested in, that diagram then became the thing that that person, that manager, was carrying around with them to show everybody in the organization and have those conversations. So they led the charge to have the conversation with all of the impacted stakeholders, which is fantastic. It's what I would otherwise have done, but now I've got 2 people that can go out and do what was necessary to make sure that everybody knew what was coming and they could contribute to the conversation.
There's 2 things I heard there, Darryl. One is it seems like that your discussion was really in a trusted environment, that when you presented this, it was very receptive, and that the person you were working with, and it almost sounds to me like you gave them a context or something like that about here's the basis of the problem. And the other thing that I didn't hear is that you presented options to them. It seems much more, I don't know, prototypical, more fundamental than presenting options. What are your thoughts on those things?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Options analysis is part of what we do and is important at different times. In this circumstance, that was not the case. We're actually leveraging a relationship that we already had with a vendor, so we didn't, we weren't going through an options analysis. But the options analysis process also is sort of, I suppose, made easier to consume if you're able to visually represent those options in a way that's easy to understand. We're always dealing with people that are time poor. They cannot read, you know, the tome that the architect writes about everything to be considered. So you need to sort of develop that skill of knowing what to include and what to discard when you're trying to communicate effectively to people that have a lot of others that are coming to them with stories about what needs to be done. And so you have to recognize that they are in a position to make decisions, but they do not necessarily have all of the time to take into account everything you'd like to tell them.
How important is that to building trust, being aware of their time constraints and getting the points right?
Well, it's fundamental to the development of relationships, and as I say, people, relationships, communication. So it sort of sits at the heart of all of that. You have to understand the person on the other side of the table that you're talking to, what's keeping them up at night, what their challenges are. And sometimes they might have a view of the world that you need to subtly influence, but recognizing who that human being is that's sitting across the table from you, and what biases they might have brought into the room, what biases you're bringing into the room, and having that conversation, as I say, with a real human being that's sitting on the other side, and understanding what their challenges are and how you can help with those. That's important, and it speaks to a concept that we've talked about before, which is empathy. So
Yes.
I did write a series of articles a few years ago for the journal, where I was talking about how to become an EA, and I distilled the skills section down into two words, which was logic. So you do have to have a think about what you're proposing, because you will get shot to pieces if you haven't had a good hard think about what you're suggesting. And the consequences of our decisions and our suggestions is significant for organizations. But also empathy. So logic and empathy were the two words that I distilled everything down to, which I think is good to keep in mind.
How do you demonstrate empathy in a meeting with a stakeholder, and what do you do? I'd like you to also address, what do you do with a tough bird that you're dealing with, and you need to pull them in. They don't trust you. You're in there. They're maybe even hostile, heaven forbid. And I mean, it sounds like empathy is a great place to start, but how do you build that trust so that they trust you to actually be creative?
Yeah, so that's obviously not easy and is not achievable in every circumstance. So you do have to sort of have a realistic view of the circumstance that you're in at the time. For me, I'm an introvert, and I have a quiet personality, which is somewhat surprising to some people when they meet me, but usually because I am, running a conference or something like that. So last place you'd expect to see an introvert, but uh, I have a tendency, therefore, to be quiet and in meetings, and we do have to deal with a lot of large personalities. Uh, and so my quietness, I think, becomes useful because I can sit back and observe and understand the dynamics in the room. And reading a room is a underappreciated and important skill for an architect, and for others that have to deal regularly with large scale decision making. So giving yourself that time to sit and watch and understand and see what might be motivating people, and looking for the opportunity to find something that they're expressing, whether directly or indirectly, that you can then tie your ideas to, so that what you're ending up with is something that achieves the outcomes that you're looking for, and you will need to make compromises on those things. Nothing ever works out exactly the way you think it should. That's fine, as long as generally you're heading in a healthy direction, but also links back to the other stakeholders' concerns. So you need to be able to create a space for yourself to be able to see what they are, sometimes reading past what's actually being said and understanding what those motivations might be. That's not a simple skill, and it's not something that works every time, but it is something that you might be conscious of as you develop as an architect.
Wow, that really resonates with me as a fellow introvert. And what I'm really hearing out of this is, wow, you really got to listen hard. Active listening is really a critical part of that.
Yeah, for sure. And, as I say, it's probably just more coincidence, and a fortunate coincidence, that I happen to be a quiet type of person that will sort of sit back in meetings and let everybody have a say. And that certainly helps. That then therefore enables you to do that active listening technique that you're referring to, and then reflect on what that means in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and be open to that. When I say critical thinking, be open to that critical thinking coming back your way, and understanding what it means in terms of how you might need to change your approach or the direction you're setting. As I say, we're all operating under constraints. So the idea that we're going to come up with an ideal solution and execute that on that perfectly Well, if it happens, great. I'm happy for you that you've found a circumstance where that happens. The majority of cases, that doesn't happen. So it's about understanding your constraints and your compromises and the perspectives of others and trying to integrate them into what you're trying to achieve.
Going forward, sort of the new enterprise architect and thinking about what we need to do to make those changes. There's a few things that you said that really resonate with me. One of those is it's not just about technology, but there's a good component that's really about organizational change and understanding that and being able to relate to people and really say, well, what are we doing? And maybe presenting non-technology with technology solutions. Is that part of it, Darryl?
Yeah, interesting idea, Bryce. I did have a technology career. I was a programmer. I did design solutions. And then I moved into a role where I sat as the liaison between business and IT. And I think that's really important in terms of my development, in that it separated me from the hard and fast technical aspects of the role and gave me the opportunity to understand more about the business aspect. And so that meant that the conversations I was having gravitated towards what the business purpose was, what the outcomes were that they were trying to achieve. And that then reinforces that series of why questions about what is it that you're trying to achieve by doing this thing. We're not just order takers, we're trying to contextualize things. And so we need to have those conversations that aren't technology so that we can understand how the technology applies. At the end of the day, it's just a tool to achieve an outcome. And you really need to dig down on that outcome and understand the why question.
In terms of understanding the why, where do you draw the line between gathering information, having sort of an insightful data-based understanding of what's happening in the environment versus drawing new innovative insights or ways forward that maybe aren't in the data?
Yeah, so I've used different techniques over the years for, opening up space for conversations about things that might be on the horizon. So, watching briefs and the like, so that people can keep informed. But it's always contextualized around what that means for the business. So, for instance, I built a roadmap for an organization about 3 or 4 years ago, and it talked about the fundamentals that needed to occur within the organization to prepare us for all of these other things. So I cited all of the things that might then be available in a few years, that might disrupt the industry, that might create competition that's unexpected, and what we needed to do to be able to prepare ourselves as an organization to leverage those things as they mature. So it's about making people aware of the potential changes that might be happening. And we always appreciate the saying that predictions are hard, particularly the ones about the future. But we can see some things that are on the horizon. We can theorize about how they might play out in terms of the context of the organization, the industry that we're working in. And we can figure out how to make that information available in the context of what the business is trying to achieve.
How important is it that you talked about doing roadmaps and taking into account future, I guess, potential events and mapping them to your roadmap? How important is traceability to those things in that roadmap so that you can show somebody, look at, I've thought of this?
Yeah, traceability in what context, Bryce?
So you've got a roadmap, they've got a business where they want to go somewhere, and you're saying, well, these are the events you have to deal with. I'm almost thinking in terms of different scenarios that you're looking at with the business, almost like transformation scenarios that you're putting into that roadmap. Well, this is what your architecture might look like if you do this. This is what it might look like if you do that. Do you ever get involved in that kind of mapping, or how do you? I guess the question is, how do you structure those roadmaps so that you're taking into account the road ahead and the things that you know, and then maybe accounting for some of the risks that you don't know?
Yeah, that's good. And I just lost the light in the room, but that's okay. I think you can still see me.
It's pretty cool, actually. Yeah, you just kind of faded out there for a second.
It's all good. So yeah, that's an interesting question. What I've found is that um, there's always something new coming. There's always something to be concerned with, and it's about prioritizing where your efforts are. And quite often, organisations are not in a space in order to be able to leverage those things when they occur. So look for those fundamentals that are required in order to meet that innovation as it occurs down the track. So not everything has to be done now, but there are some fundamentals that need to be looked at so that your organisation is in a state to leverage those capabilities as they come along. So one of the things I talk about a lot is adaptability. And adaptability in the context of being able to receive expected and unexpected changes and embrace them as part of how your organisation functions with the least possible effort. So creating the adaptability in your organisation so you can take advantage of these things that you either know are coming or the things that you don't know are coming. And the other thing that I tend to do is I spend a lot of time keeping an eye on what's happening in both business innovation space and also technology innovations. And feeding that information subtly to others in the organization so that they can consume it in small digestible pieces that are contextualized to the business or the industry that they operate in, appreciating, as I said before, that they are very busy people often, and they are time poor, and they are looking at material that isn't the same as what you're looking at. They're not reading all of the announcements around startups in the tech space and future advancements and where investments are going and those sorts of things. They're concerned with the operation of their business. So you're an extra research assistant for them to find that information and bring it to them in a way that makes sense to them, that applies to their world, and is made much more consumable than some of the material you see, say, expressed by the tech industry.
Actually, I think you sort of addressed the final question that I have, which is about really extreme situations. So you're in a situation, and you know, if this happens this way, it's going to be disastrous. I need to escalate this issue. And what I'm almost hearing you say on that case is, well, you know what? It's not my job to maybe yell and say the sky is falling. It's more my job to make sure that I share the full context as to why I believe the sky might be falling, so that whoever I'm dealing with understands it. Is that kind of what you're getting at, or am I missing anything there?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. There's very rarely a sky is falling moment. But as I say, understanding how your organisation might be changed so that it's more adaptable to those things that occur down the track is always a good idea. And yeah, contextualizing things, because the executives that I deal with, they get fed information all the time through the media and through vendors that talk about tremendous promise of new technologies,
Mm.
and so the hype cycle is in full swing, and that never plays out in the timeframes that the vendors speak about. It's never quite as bad as what the media portrays it as. So somebody needs to bring some realism, I guess, into the conversation. And at the same time, they have to still run the organisation. The organisation still has to function, and it still has to change in a way that's healthy and sets them up so that it continues to run effectively in the future.
It sounds like there's that balance between really helping the business stakeholders, and I guess the other stakeholders that you're working with, really understand the difference. You know, here's misinformation, here's hype, and we're going to sort of temper them with a little bit of sanity.
Indeed, yeah, and so that's part of our job, is to, and I think the watching briefs help with that. The relationship building so that you can have those conversations. The number of times I've been stopped in a corridor by a person with some authority in an organisation. They just wanted to understand something about something they'd seen or read, or somebody had told them, and so that just adds to the relationship you're building with them and the ability to advise them on things, and that takes time. So, you know, just appreciate that that these things are not overnight fixes, as much as there's a tendency towards short-term views and behaviors, and so you're constantly fighting against those, but making sure that people can at least get the information they need in a form that is relevant to them.
How often, Darryl, have you actually reached out to sort of get that grounded context to your extended network, either through, you've seen stuff come in as an editor with the Enterprise Architecture Professional Journal, you've been part of Built, you've actually been, well, you've done 100 things and you've seen a lot of information. Has that been helpful in grounding that and actually trying to figure out what makes sense?
So I have been so incredibly lucky to be in the position that I've been in over the last, say, 10 years or so, running events and doing various things in the community, because it's enabled me to sit down with or stand in the room and have conversations with countless numbers of people that all have unique experiences that are sharing their insight and their wisdom with me. So I'm very lucky that I've been able to be involved in so many things where so many people are there and sharing, and gives me insight into different approaches to doing things, different things happening in different industries, real stories from the trenches about what it's like to actually try and implement these sorts of technologies or other changes to business operating models. We could talk at length about the idea of enterprise agility and the realities of trying to implement that concept more broadly than outside the sort of technology realm. So yeah, I've been lucky in that I've been part of all of these community events, and I think that that's really important for us as a discipline, that we continue to have a vibrant community where we share insight with one another. And on top of that, of course, I access a lot of online material to keep an eye on what's happening and form my own opinions based on both sort of projected use of technology, but also the stories where they talk about what actually happened in organizations when they tried to adopt it and how it went wrong, and learn from other people's experience.
Darryl, thanks. That's an excellent discussion. Before we go, just one final thing. What's your advice for perhaps up and coming architects? What one piece of advice would you leave them with to be successful?
Find a mentor.
Okay.
So yeah, look for somebody who can help you with your development. It's a multifaceted discipline, and learning it all by yourself and developing all of the skills that you need and getting the experience. It can be done, but it's a lot better, I think, more rounded and more fun if you've got somebody helping you along the way. So definitely think about a mentor. And I could talk endlessly about all of the books that I've read and that sort of thing that have helped me form different views, many of which have nothing to do with architecture. In fact, I'd say less than 10% of the books that I've read are architecture related. The more of it is about both. I split my reading time between business development sort of skills, and also sort of business education, and also personal development. So understanding myself better and understanding other people better, because they're both very important parts of the conversation.
Darryl, thanks again. We do have to do a follow-up on mentoring, I think. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bryce. Appreciate it.